This is a real-time sketch and chat, but the first 2 minutes here are sped up significantly because this drawing was just giving me heck and working me over. Uh, it's only half the image and I spent 40 minutes on it just trying to make it work. I had previously drawn and either erased or thrown out this same image. It was just taking me forever. This was, again, someone lying prone and buried beneath the rubble of a house. And when that happens, you just got to work at it. I had stopped and taken a break and drawn something else a little bit, but you can't avoid what you don't want to draw forever because then you never draw it. You never learn how to. So I didn't want my, quote-unquote Inktober video to be me trying to pencil and trying to pencil and trying to pencil something. So we sped this up. Consequently, don't be alarmed when you hear my usual live video intro at the 6-minute 30-second mark. That's when I actually get back on and start talking while I draw. So as you know, I've been doing Q&As these videos, so submitted by Mike DiBaggio taken directly from a GE Challenger story. He asks, "Suppose," he cried with feeble violence, "that all the debts in the world were called up simultaneously, and immediate payment insisted upon. What, under our present conditions, would happen then?" I love this because it's such an overblown question, but it is sourced right from the public domain, and you know how I love the public domain. And yeah, so the Challenger stories were written by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, and I believe this is someone's father-in-law asking them inane political questions. But hey, let's give this one a shot. Obviously, if all debts were called up simultaneously, the economy would tank. Countries and people take on massive amounts of debt that they can't possibly handle all the time. You wouldn't get it back if you tried to call it up all at once. I would hope that there would not be mass jailings and violence, but that's always a possibility. But really, you'd probably be looking at some kind of great collapse and the world at least partially going back to some kind of bartering system. I know that in the United States, paper or digital, the paper money or the digital readout on your bank statement is not backed by gold or any precious metals or anything. So, I mean, in some strange way, we're all just, rat racing for numbers on a screen. Or paper that is literally just paper. But somehow it gets us through the day and we go in and we do our jobs and we can buy food and get services that way. But barring that, we'd have to go back to the good old bartering where you try to, do jobs individually for people or something like that. It's a little weird and strange when you think that that's how the world worked for a long time. And then places got on the gold standard, and that helped make trading services and bartering easier. But we aren't on that anymore. So I don't know how long it would take to get back on something like that if there was some big economic collapse. It is interesting and humbling, however, to think that, that question was being posed in a book in 1912 when there actually was a standard, and you know, before the Great Depression, when you know, the everyman was trying to call up all their money at once and banks couldn't keep up with it. I mean, that was a huge financial crisis. Of course, I'm talking about the Great Depression in America. I'm talking about America for all of this stuff. That's where I'm from. But it's interesting to note that when that question was posed, Britain was still on the gold standard. So it would have been potentially slightly less of a mess than if all debts were called up in the world right now. But as for the larger country-to-country implications, I have no idea. I'm not going there. All right, folks, that's probably the most serious I'm gonna get on this channel in a long, long time. But the question was asked, and I did in fact want to try to answer it. Please keep in mind that I did not think very hard about that answer. It's a completely off-the-cuff one, and I'm probably not going to get into a big, you know, socio-political debate in the comments. But if anyone wants to try, go right ahead. On to the regular questions now. Howdy folks, Shell Presto here. Still trying to get back into my Inktober groove. Still trying to get back into my Inktober groove. This drawing has been kicking my butt. But we're gonna give it another shot, because that's what we do. Never let a drawing beat you, folks. If you can't get it right and you have to start over, start over. But you know, if you approach it carefully, and you know, if you screw up the first time, if you approach it in a different way, just keep trying. I mean, even I get frustrated, and if you hear a bell, that's my cat. You know, even I'll get frustrated, and there have even been times I've torn drawings up. But you have to start again. You have to try again, because that's the only way you get better. You know, if you have to post your failings on an internet forum, and you know, hopefully someone who's a little better than you can offer some help, or someone who's at the same level as you can offer some help, or heck, sometimes even people that can't draw as well as you can still see that something's wrong. You know, sometimes people that don't draw at all can help. Just keep looking for answers, folks. Don't give up hope on that. Let's see. I'm still continuing to have a rough time of it too, because I was saying I really like those these Micron PN pens, and I really do. I've been using this one pretty hard for, I think, about a month now, and I finally got the nib to a point where it's not really bouncing back, and I'm getting some, you can see it here, I'm getting the double line effect. But for a pen that's like $2.50 to get a month out of it after a lot of rough wear and tear, I'm okay with that. I bought the one in a 3-pack. I bought the one in a 3-pack, and I couldn't find the one pen, and then I left the pen cap off the new one, so now I'm back to not using them. At least for now, because that's how I roll. There's a new one around here somewhere, but I have no clue where it is right now. It's the other bad part about, like, you know, I'll draw in different areas of the house, depending on if my son's awake or asleep. So my stuff's always moving, and then sometimes I pick up everything and drag it to my mom's house. So yeah, it's pretty easy for me to lose things, and having a pen dry out just really rots. Okay. Judd asked another question that I'm happy to answer. So what models and figure aids do you prefer? And the answer to that is pretty easy, and it's whatever I can get that can get the job done. Yes, I'm going to go into more detail than that, but at the end of the day, that's the answer. So, yeah, alright. I'm sorry that the camera's going to shake as I do this, because that's how my camera is set up. As a matter of fact, I think a buddy named Fog Breaker asked what my camera setup is like, and I'm going to have to get that information to him. Here's my reminder to myself. But you can see for this particular drawing, I was having a really hard time with this. This is actually, I think, my second time attempting this drawing now. I actually got an action figure out and covered it in pencils and lead replacement containers to mimic what I'm trying to draw right now. That's not my preferred model, but it's the model that's going to work best for this drawing, because I can't exactly, you know, knock half a house down and, you know, take a picture of myself in it. And I'm going to knock on wood on that one to... I don't want my house to fall down. But, you know, having a discussion on the AAA Creators Discord quite a while ago, and it was like the weirdest internet searches that you have done for your comics, and it's like you end up drawing a lot of weird stuff that you know, different things for research, looking up medical conditions I hope I never get, and all sorts of things. So, you know, right now I'm drawing someone whose house has collapsed on them. Why? Martians, of course. And, I don't know if you noticed, but the hands on the action figure are not in these poses, so I'm doing my rare making hand. Don't say it's that rare, but I think this hand looks pretty good considering I'm making it all up. It's always scary when you're making up hands. But yeah, I will sometimes use action figures. You know, I've said it before, I'll say it again. Probably the best thing that you can do is either pose for yourself or get friends to pose for you, so that you can get the exact pose at the camera angle you want. Of course, depending on what the pose is, that's not actually possible. Gosh, I miss my pens already. Or if you don't have friends or family daring enough to pose for you, or they hate getting pictures taken, it's harder because you don't know exactly what kind of photo the person's going to take. But if you give enough instruction and you're if you give enough instruction and you're lucky, maybe a friend can take a photo for you, and then you can make the pose you want. There are a lot of pose reference sites, like SenshiStock's the one off the top of my head. FaceStock is another one that I like, where they just post photos of themselves, and you sort of have to hope that they have something you can use, like that fits the situation. And I mean, obviously, you can use your imagination with things. You could take, you know, an arm from one pose and, you know, look at it for another pose, and piecemeal things together, and you can end up doing that a lot, and that can work out just as well for you. There's also pose books. I have a couple, and I have a couple neat ones. Buddy Scalera, who was he's done quite a few of his own comics, but I've never gotten my hands on them. You're most likely to recognize the name from he was a Deadpool writer, an early Deadpool writer. And he actually put out comic book pose books for artists, despite the fact that he was a writer. And those are really good. I think they're actually called comic pose reference, something like that. Anyway, I'll leave a link in the description below. I really enjoy those books. They do a lot of action-y poses, which is great. There's a series by, it looks like, I'm trying to read an angle here, Chakor and Lowe, called Virtual Pose. Those are pretty interesting books too. They're more tailored to classical art, but you know, you can use a classical art. You can use a classical art book for, you know, fun drawings and action poses and stuff like that too. It's all your imagination and how you can it's all up to your imagination and how you can piece together poses in your head. You don't need an exact picture of something to you know, draw it. If that were the case, Jack Kirby never would have drawn anything. He was always making stuff up as he went. And then, so I use those books. Those books are interesting. Oh, I should say the Buddy Scalera books. Most of them you can still get pretty cheap, or you could get them secondhand. But if you can get a new copy, they would come with reference discs that contained even more photos, and that's really nice. I'm lucky that I did manage to get them firsthand. As a matter of fact, I think that publisher just declared bankruptcy or went under, so those books may go up in price soon. So look for them now, folks. One of them has been out of print and is pretty expensive, but I think the other ones are still okay. But yeah, try to get them with the discs. Those virtual pose books I was just talking about, there's non-sexual nudity in them. A lot of drawing books do have nudity. You need to know how to draw what's underneath the clothes to know how the clothes are going to fold. It's the truth of drawing. So there's that to consider with those books. The Buddy Scalera comic reference poses, those are, you know, no parents are going to bat an eyelash at them. There's no nudity in those. But in the virtual pose books, there is nudity, so you've been warned. But those are really great because they come with a disc, and the images on the disc are actually they rotate, so you can click and drag so that you could see things from different angles. Now the camera is set at a certain height and you can't change the height, but it spins in 360 degrees, so that's pretty interesting. And the book itself, it has the same pose but at slightly different angles. I don't remember if it's 45 degree angles or 12.5, not 12.5, 20, what, like 22.5 degree angles or something. But there's one set pose and then it's rotated. There's photos of it being rotated multiple times. So those books are very interesting that way, and they're really, really great if you need to try to catch something at a particular angle. So I use them for that. What other pose books do I like? I have two exercise books. One is a Navy SEALs exercise book, and the other is The Anatomy of Exercise for Longevity. And I don't actually use those for pictures of the people in those books, but both of those books have 3D models of of a skinless person, just, you know, a bunch of person with all their muscles showing, doing the exercises. These books are exceptionally helpful for drawing beefed up superheroes, because, you know, you can, you know, me and my friends are fit, but we ain't bodybuilders, so you know, if I need to see all the muscles on something so I can exaggerate them, those books really, really help, because I can say like, oh, well, what would that muscle look like in that pose? And that is exceptionally helpful. Let's see. Oh, do I want to put a line here? I'm struggling with this so much. I think I'm gonna put a line there and hope. Oh boy. Why do I do this? Let's see. I'm gonna flip this ruler so I can make sure I'm kind of being straight. It should be just a little bit angled that way. I get so nervous when I do this. Okay, here we go. This is the line. You know what it's gonna be. Oh boy. See the fun things I share with you guys? I think this should be thicker. We'll put it here. I guess these should kind of be the same height or width. So, be responsible and pull out a ruler. Just shy of. Okay. And then you try to hold it at a. Hey, I actually had that really darn close. Look at that. Who knew? Alright, so that does need to be thicker. I wanted to show more of his collar, but that ain't gonna be happening. The drawing tells me what it wants, and I must obey. Alright, I want it to be a. Okay. And now I can't get the pen cap off one-handed. Alright. The other thing is it's good for. Alright, so some people are going to be like, oh, you need to, you know, memorize all the muscles. You don't. You just need to be, to draw effectively, especially if you're going to do superheroes. And that's not actually true. It's helpful to memorize all the muscles, but if you're powerless to memorize muscles and you just can't do it, that's okay, because there's reference books. So long as you keep something close to your desk, you'll be fine. But it's also good not only for beefy characters, but I have a really hard time remembering how the muscles in the arm go, and you know, my muscles are not very pronounced. I have stereotypical girl arms, so you know, that book is really helpful just for that too. And I think that that's a big part of drawing. You need to recognize what you are not good at and pursue, pursue it. So if you're, bad at drawing anatomy or knowing where muscles are or things like that, then you need to, get pose books and figure out what you're bad at, and always be looking to improve. Once upon a time, I actually tried design, and I learned, oof, I'm really bad at design, and that's not a good thing because I make books and book covers. So, I had to go seeking design books. So yeah, you had to know what you're good at, what you're bad at, and that takes a while to learn too. Oh, I also like to get, if you go to yard sales, not yard sales, used book sales, they crop up every once in a while. If you go to used book sales, or you, I especially like to browse in, what is it? Ollie's is one of those bargain discount stores that has a lot of books at reduced prices. Ollie's is one I like. Barnes and Noble, when you first walk into the Barnes and Noble, and they have all the you first walk into Barnes and Noble, usually up by the registers they have their discount book section, and all the books are like a third their price or something like that. I like to wander around in there and look for interesting reference books too. Alright, I hope you folks don't mind. I turned on some music. My selection's kind of limited because, YouTube only allows you to use so much background music, even if it's literally just music you're listening to. But I normally listen to music when I draw, and drawing without it actually drives me a little batty. So, what was I saying? Oh, anyway, in the front of like Barnes and Nobles, and at used book sales and stuff like that, and discount places that have books. There's not too many of them. Like Ollie's, you can pick up some interesting things that you wouldn't think are drawing books. Like a good one is I have a book on Muhammad Ali. You're like, oh, do you do boxing comics, Shell? No, I don't do boxing comics, but Mysterious X or Kid Awesome from East End Regulars knows boxing, and when he hit someone or grapple someone or things like that, I can look in there and find some interesting poses to practice. I can look at the form, things that can be helpful in that way. Barnes & Noble will often have like history books that are just pictures of weapons, swords, armor, guns, things like that. That could be super helpful. Let's see, what else do I have here that's interesting from them? I have one book that I picked up there. It's called Dancers Among Us, and it's dancers wearing normal clothes in everyday situations, but like making really extreme dance movements. So like ballet books and stuff like that can help you get pictures of people in exaggerated poses. You know, just all sorts of things that you have to keep your eyes open and say to yourself, does this have applications other than, you know, the obvious what it is meant for? Also, if you hear a lot of meowing, my cat is trying to break into the bedroom where my husband and my son are sleeping. I have 3 cats. They sometimes appear at the ends of videos. So you may or may not have seen them, but they've all been there at some point or another. And yeah, so I will pretty much consider anything as a drawing reference, whatever I need to get the job done. The other thing I like to do is I like to think about movies when I'm drawing. You know, if I'm not afraid to, you know, turn on pro wrestling, or I have DVDs of old WWF matches or WCW matches. I'll look at, what is it, Lucha Underground, for fight poses and stuff. You know, all sorts of things. You should be practicing from, you should keep an open mind and practice from lots and lots of different places, because you know, only you know what you really need to practice. I'll say that a lot of times, but it's true. All right. All right, I'm going to switch back over to voiceover. Like I said, sometimes it's hard for me to concentrate while I talk at the same time. So the video is going to stay real time or just be slow or just be sped up a little bit to line up with this voiceover. But we have another question from Nephtalie, and she asked how mixed media can be used in comic pages because my comic is black and white. Well, Nephtalie, the sky's kind of the limit. The only thing you have to really be concerned about in terms of You know, what you can or can't do with a comic is your printer. And that's if you want to print your comic. Some people do 100% web comic, and if your scanner can pick it up and do it, then, go for it. If you want to keep your comic black and white, you have a lot of options. And like I said, you should think about if you want your comic printed and where you want your comic printed, but usually the only thing you really need to consider in terms of print these days is screen tones. If you use screen tones, you should look up information on them, because there's something called moire. So screen tones are those little dots that they use to shade comics. Like if you look at comics in the newspaper or in manga, a lot of the time you'll see those dots for shading to simulate shades of gray without actually using shades of gray. The DPI that you scan them in on, or if you add them digitally instead of buying screen tones, because those screen tones are actually transparent sheets of paper with like a sticky back on them, and then you rub them with a burnisher or sometimes an eraser, but you get some pressure and heat and it applies it to your comic page. The DPI and resolution, which are scanning in computer terms, need to line up with the resolution that your printer is going to be using. Most of the things I have on that are books. I have a book on screen tones. It's called How to Draw Manga. How to Draw Manga Computone's Basic Tone Technique. And you can get most of those books, I'm looking at Amazon, for a whopping $2 plus shipping. So I will leave a link below if you want to learn more about using toner sheets or digital computones. Also, programs like Manga Studio have screen tones built in, and you can also buy special brushes for Photoshop or Manga Studio to add more or have those patterns available. I sometimes use the Photoshop brushes in my Imps comic. Oh, and you guys will be watching me do my Imps comic for Inktober too. I ink that every month, so it seemed like a good thing to try to tape for Inktober. That will be coming up in the coming week. Yeah, it's Friday, so next week I'm going to end up doing that. But besides that, Nephtalie, you can do all sorts of different ways to add. I mean, if you want to go black and white, then you kind of have to go with screen tones or cross-hatching or stippling or all sorts of pen techniques to create texture. And those can be fun. I like books by... Okay, there's a book called Rendering in Pen and Ink by Guptill, and that will teach you a lot about inking and different inking techniques. It's a wonderful book. Another book that I really like is Drawing in Pen and Ink and by Nice. And Nice also has another book called Creating Textures in Pen and Ink with Watercolor. Both of those are excellent books that Nice in particular goes through and gives examples of how she draws certain textures like stone or flowers or feathers or fur or things like that. So I really like those books, the 2 by Nice and the 1 by Guptill. Guptill is kind of a more comprehensive inking book. It gives examples of classical inkers and then, you know, goes on to everything from different types of pens to, well, it's a heavy book, but it's still good for beginners. If you want to branch out into shades of gray, there's tons of options for you. You can use a good old pencil to shade. I'm assuming you're inking because it's a comic, but you know, nowadays you don't even have to ink if you don't want to. But even if you do ink, shading with a pencil can look really nice. You can shade with different kinds of pencils. Charcoal can kind of make your book, your sketchbook, look a mess if you're doing sketchbook pages. Charcoal should really have spray fixative on it, and I don't know what that does to ink, so I wouldn't recommend doing that or do it on a sample. But you know, darker graphite pencils, or even just black colored pencils, because colored pencils tend not to smear as much if you lay sheets together. So you can use a black colored pencil or a darker graphite pencil to do some shading. You can do ink wash. I personally am not a fan of ink washes. Ink wash is just when you have a bottle of India ink and you water it down and apply it with a brush to get different shades of gray. Some people really like ink wash. I personally don't because it's kind of hard to blend out colors with it. Like once the ink dries, it dries. You can ink wash you can do on some sturdier papers if you have a light hand, but if you're going to get into wet mediums like you know, ink wash or watercolor, you will probably want to use a mixed media or a watercolor paper, so that's something to consider too. But you can get black and gray watercolor and add some shading that way. Or you can get, there are some, I know Sakura makes them. They're essentially like different shades of gray in a sort of watercolor-y or water-soluble marker that you can then further dissolve out with water on a brush to get some nice gradients. So those are all things you can think about doing. You do not need watercolor paper to use markers. You can get alcohol-based markers. There are a bunch of different brands that you can choose from. Like, you know, everyone says that Copics are the Cadillac of markers, and I believe that, but you don't need to start with Copics. There are a lot of brands that are comparable, especially if you're just looking for shades of gray. So you can, you know, look up gray alcohol markers. You know, there's cheaper brands like, I don't know, Spectrum Noir and, give me a sec. There's Dick Blick. I started with Prismacolor. Prismacolor is still a good and fine marker set. I did a lot of illustrations with those. But really, it's your comic. There's not a huge difference between printing in color and printing in black and white anymore, so really the sky's the limit. You should experiment a little bit and on standalone illustrations. And you know, you don't have to be married to whatever you choose either. With a comic, you should try not to change change up the style of what you're doing for within the same issue. So like, you know, if you do 4 pages with one method and you feel like it's not the best method in the world, you might want to try to stick with it until at least a chapter break or something. You know, if your chapter's 12 or 22 pages, try to stick with the whatever medium you're using for those 12 or 22 pages or whatever. But if you want to switch for the next chapter, you totally can. It's your comic. People are going to like it because of like what you bring to the table. So it's not the end of the world if you experiment a bit, but always experiment on a standalone illustration first to see how it works, to see if the medium you're using works with the ink you like using. And your art is going to be ever changing. You know, some people find one medium and they stick to it forever, and other people, you know, they change it up and they try different things, and that's okay too. All right, folks, I'm going to wrap it up. As a reminder, the illustration that I'm doing here is for the second Martian War Chronicles book. It's going to be called Days of Wrath. The first book, Population of Loss, is 4 short stories set during the War of the Worlds. There are 2 steampunk, 1 Wild West, and 1 fairy tale story in there. And they do have illustrations by yours truly. And I also have 5 other either short stories or novels available on Amazon.com. It'd be really cool if you folks could check them out sometime. And all book purchases help support this channel. You can also support the channel through SubscribeStar or make a one-time donation through PayPal. All the links for those things are in the description below. Also, I still invite people to ask questions for these Inktober videos so that I don't run out of things to talk about. It seems like I'm doing 2 or 3 questions each time, so I'm also going to have a really fun one coming up where I do all the top 5 lists. No, seriously, I asked a bunch of people to submit like top 5 lists they want to hear from me, like my top 5 favorite, one of them is my top 5 favorite public domain characters and things like that. If you folks want to get in on that, you can leave suggestions for that below too. Maybe it'll stretch out into 2 episodes, I don't know. But anyway, accepting additional questions. All right, folks, you guys have an awesome day. Keep drawing for Inktober. I hope your Inktober is going well. Presto, over and out. Hall's cough drops really seem to work well for me, so I shouldn't, I should just be thankful that they're around, but, and this isn't a recent development. This has been going on for like 8 years maybe, but they started putting, I think, really annoying motivational phrases on their cough drops. This be resilient isn't that bad. Where's a bad one? Like, you know, you're dying, you can barely swallow, your throat's scratchy, and then you know, your Hall's cough drop is telling you to get back in there, champ. That's what I really want to hear when I'm sick. You know, it's yours for the taking. Like you're gonna be doing your best and most awesome work while you're ridiculously sick. I mean, Hall's cough drops do not taste good. They are not the cough drop you have when you're having, like, you know, a slightly sore throat, the beginning or end of a sore throat, or, you know, you need to wet your whistle a little. No, these are chock full of menthol. These are what you take when you're ridiculously sick. Now, let's see. Don't wait to get started. What? I'm sick. I want to stay in bed. I'm miserable. If I'm at work when I'm sick, it's not a get up and go kind of moment. It's just not. High five yourself. Seriously. No. No, Halls. Just let me be sick. You know, I want one that says, you know, go ahead, call off, or, you know, you're here, that's enough. That's what I needed when I was sick at work. You know, the bare minimum is okay today. You've earned it. Anyway, have a good one, folks. Presto, over and out.
Farewell and adieu to you, fair Spanish ladies. Farewell and adieu to you, ladies of Spain.